I want to walk you through something today that I think is one of the most misunderstood and most overlooked labs in healthcare, and that's ferritin. And not in the way you've probably heard it before. Not just low iron equals fatigue. It's more than that. But also how ferritin can quietly affect your energy, your mood, your brain, your hair, and your metabolism. And why so many people are told they're fine when this is actually part of what's actually going on. Because ferritin is not just about iron. Ferritin is about reserve. It's about what your body has stored away to keep you functioning day to day. Think of ferritin like your body's savings account, not your checking account, not what's immediately available, but what's stored for when your body actually needs it. If your savings account is low, you can still function for a while, but everything becomes a lot harder. You don't necessarily crash overnight. Instead, you start to notice subtle changes. You're more tired than you used to be. Your workouts feel harder. You don't recover the same. Your focus isn't as sharp. Your hair doesn't feel as full. All of those things can happen. And it doesn't all happen at once. And that is why it's so easy to miss. And it's often overlooked. One of the biggest misconceptions is that ferritin only matters if you're anemic. But here's the thing. You can have completely normal hemoglobin and still have a low ferritin. I've seen it plenty of times. And that means that you are not technically anemic, but your body is still running on low reserves. And when that happens and you start having those symptoms, your body has to actually prioritize what's more important. It starts making decisions like, what do I absolutely need to keep functioning? Brain, that's essential. My heart, that's essential. Muscles are important, but things like hair growth, optimal hormone balance, energy, consistent energy anyway, mental clarity, those start to get deprioritized. So you don't necessarily feel sick, you just don't feel like yourself. Let me give you an example. So I've seen people who come in not because they're exhausted, but because they say things like, I just don't feel like myself. I just don't feel sharp anymore. They're starting to forget things. They're rereading the same sentence. They're struggling to focus, and nobody is thinking about ferritin because unfortunately, because we've been taught to associate iron only with fatigue. But iron plays a role in oxygen delivery to tissues, including your brain. So if your ferritin is low, your brain is not getting the support it needs, not getting enough support to be able to function optimally anyway. So now let's talk about hair, because that's where ferritin shows up in a very visible way. Hair is definitely not essential for survival. So when your body senses that reserves are low, hair growth is actually one of the first things to shift. I've seen a lot of people with thinning hair, and it's been related to stress. And people start to notice that they have increased shedding, thinning, loss of volume, hair that just doesn't grow the same like it used to. And what often happens is people are told, like I said, it's stress, it's hormones, it's just you aging. And I can't tell you how tired I get of hearing that. But yes, those things can play a role, but ferritin is often part of that picture. Another area where ferritin shows up that people don't actually expect is in their mood. Low ferritin is associated, or has been associated, with low motivation, increased anxiety, even depressive symptoms. And that's because iron is involved in neurotransmitter function. So when your iron stores are low, your brain chemistry can be affected. It seems like that makes sense. So now let's shift to something that I think is really important. Why is this missed so often? There are a few reasons, actually. Number one is because of those lab ranges. Most labs will show ferritin as normal as long as it's above a very low threshold, something like 15, sometimes even 20. But a lot of people start having symptoms well above that level. Number 2 is it's not always tested in context. Ferritin doesn't exist in isolation. You have to look at the big picture. You have to look at iron. You have to look at the TIBC, saturation, even inflammation, because ferritin can also be elevated in inflammation. So if someone has a high inflammation marker, their ferritin might look normal or even high, but functionally, they could still not be utilizing iron like they should. So, and number 3 would be that symptoms are often attributed to something else. Fatigue becomes stress. Hair loss becomes hormones. Brain fog becomes just that you're getting older. And no one is necessarily asking, like, what are we missing? What haven't we checked? Now, let's talk about something else that doesn't get discussed enough, and that's how ferritin becomes low in the first place. A lot of people ask me that, like, because it's not always just about intake. A lot of people think it's just related to low dietary intake, and yes, low dietary iron can play a role, but there are often other contributors like heavy menstrual cycles, people who have gut absorption problems, as I say, chronic inflammation, stress can contribute, but that's not always the main thing. Certain medications can also do it. So simply telling someone to take iron without actually understanding why it's low is incomplete care. And this is where you want to shift your thinking. Ferritin is not just a number, it's actually a signal, and it's telling you something about your reserves, your absorption, your overall system balance. So instead of asking, is this normal? The better question is this optimal for how I feel? Because I've seen people with ferritin in the 20s who feel absolutely terrible. And I've seen people with ferritin in the 70s or 80s who can feel completely different. And in that gap, that's where individualized care matters, because care should always be individualized. And that's exactly why I don't look at labs in isolation. I look at patterns, I look at symptoms, and I look at how everything connects. Because ferritin might be part of the problem, part of the picture, but it's rarely the only piece. So if you've been dealing with fatigue or hair thinning or brain fog, low motivation, or just feeling like something is off, and you've been told everything is normal with your labs, this might be something worth looking at more, or looking at, period, because it may not have been checked at all. And you shouldn't be guessing, you shouldn't be assuming, but actually testing and understanding. And that's exactly why I created my lab panel. And that's because I wanted a way to look deeper at these patterns, to connect the dots, connect the symptoms, and be able to identify and help people understand what their body is actually trying to tell them. So if this is something that resonates with you, if you're starting to connect the dots and you're thinking, okay, maybe this is part of what's going on with me, you can schedule a free clarity call through the link in my bio, and we'll walk through and talk through your symptoms, talk through your history, and whether deeper lab testing is the right next step for you. Because your body is not random, your symptoms aren't random, and you deserve answers that actually make sense. So reach out, and I look forward to speaking with you.